Good evening and welcome to the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. A couple of minutes late. I blame Eager, right? Why not? Easy guy to throw under the bus. Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager, Sumer Sports. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. A lot to get to. Yes, we're going to talk about his Travis Kelce back to himself. What's the upside on Rashee Rice? We'll get into Charles Omenihu coming back off his suspension. Frank Clark being discussed with the Chiefs. The matchup with the Chargers. What are our predictions? But a special guest tonight. We're very excited to be welcoming former Chiefs, four-time, I think, All-Pro offensive tackle Mitchell Schwartz to the pod. We talk offensive line, Jawaan Taylor, Super Bowls, just being an all-around swell guy. It's what we do right now here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast.
You're listening to the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Chiefs on planet Earth, breaking down the Chiefs like no one else can. Red, Gold, and Bold is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro. Jeff Chadiha is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Eric Eager is the vice president of research and development for Sumer Sports. Soren Petro was the afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. The Red, Gold, and Bold podcast is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are the hosts of the best Chiefs podcast, Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro.
And good evening and welcome. If you're catching us via the podcast, remember you can be a part of the conversation, be a part of the stream. We broadcast usually live Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Central, and whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, you can be a part of the conversation. We got a lot of people joining in, and we appreciate that. As always, and gentlemen, a special guest tonight. Not bad. Mitchell Schwartz, I think the best right tackle I've ever seen play the game. Not a bad guy to add to the mix, right?
No,
I'll take him.
Yeah, it was, all the way back to the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference in 2022. Not only one of the better people to ever play offensive line for this franchise, but also somebody who really understands the game from that side as well. So this should be great.
Yeah, let's welcome him in. Mitchell Schwartz joins us, and I know I'm really the dunce now, as I have the doctorate in mathematics in Eric Eager, the Michigan grad in Jeff Chadiha, Cal grad in Mitch Schwartz. I know who's the dumbest guy in the room, right? Mitch, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. There is a certain level of sophistication to know that you are the dumbest guy in the room, though, so don't underplay yourself.
That's right. Q's in the house. Is that what they say?
Oh, yeah, it is. Q's is in the house, and Q's knows its place, too. That's one of the other things they taught us at broadcasting school. Mitch, how are you, man? Like how's life treating you?
Life's great. I tell everyone they should try to retire as quick as they can. It's pretty fun. It's nice to not have the stress of, especially in the NFL, and having to protect literally the league MVP and Super Bowl MVP. It's nice to not have to deal with that day to day and kind of have that consume your thoughts.
Yeah, no doubt. Listen, so what does your whole day, consist of now? Besides, I know you're quite the accomplished chef, right? Like you like to dabble in the kitchen. A lot of time spent there.
Yeah, a little more than dabbling. A lot of eating, a lot of cooking, a lot of contemplating what's coming next. If we're at home, I love to golf. That's kind of my competitive outlet. It's a good way to stay pretty frustrated at yourself. I'm used to a certain feedback loop of guilt and frustration and trying to get better. So golf kind of scratches that itch for me. And we like to travel when we can too, and take care of our dogs, and just that's kind of the beauty, is being able to do whatever you please. But for me, it's a lot of cooking, a lot of eating, a lot of golf.
Mitch, I'm curious, since you've got all this time now, I'm sure you catch a Chiefs football game every now and then, and you were around for the glory days of this offense, where the bar was set really high, and there's been a lot of discussions about where it's at and what needs to be done. How do you feel about where this offense is at and what it needs to do to get to a certain level?
Yeah, it seems like they're not really where they want to be per se, or not where they were, or at the standard of, kind of what Pat's used to and what you're used to when you've got a Pat Mahomes offense. I would say the majority of that is probably receiver based at the moment. I mean, some of it's obviously offensive line related. I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit, but it seems like we're kind of in that rut a couple of years ago, maybe, where it seemed like there was a bit of a disconnect on offense and not everyone was trusting everything that was going around. And I think you can kind of see it a little bit sometimes when Pat gets a little frustrated and starts trying to make things happen. Doesn't necessarily let the game come to himself. I personally think that that's him, kind of feeling like he has the onus to have to do things. But I do think there's signs of progress. I mean, guys do get open. When they do get open, got to catch the ball a little bit more consistently. But it's a young group. And I mean, you look back at the history of Andy Reid, and not too many young receivers produce really well. I mean, Tyreek is kind of the outlier in that regard. So it does take guys a year, 2 years, 3 years to kind of fully get to their capabilities. And it's a difficult offense. He doesn't necessarily, pare it back as much. And I think he tries to find roles for guys and things that they're comfortable with mentally and things that they can handle. And, unfortunately, when you're dealing with this much turnover in that specific position group, you kind of have to deal with the growing pains during the season. I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of growing pains, they went with Andrew Wiley and Lucas Niang kind of in that right tackle spot after you retired, but now they went out and spent, pretty big money on Jawaan Taylor. And, it hasn't been necessarily the most, the best start so far for him as far as penalties and things like that. There's a ton of data in the NFL now. There's obviously, I think offensive linemen, at least, from my playing days, are in my opinion, some of the more introspective and awake players to sort of what they're going through. If you're in Jawaan Taylor's shoes, what's going on in your head? What is the week to week preparation in order to try to, sort of improve week to week?
Well, that's kind of the issue. Is there's a lot of things I think going on in his head. He has been getting better, and especially the pre-snap stuff has been cut down the last couple of weeks. But I think that first game in particular, I mean, he only got called for the one false start, which was very late in the game. So I would say that all the narrative, Chris Collinsworth, all that stuff didn't really impact him directly that game. I think, he had a mostly good game and wasn't getting called for offsides. That's kind of my argument. Everything in life, if they're going to let you get away with it, you keep doing it. And if there's no consequence for it, you keep doing it. That's kind of how we're wired as people. So it's on the refs to enforce that. And they came with the fury the next week in Jacksonville. And I think he got kind of hit again from all perspectives in that Jacksonville game. He goes back to the place where it started for him, played 4 years, signs the big deal in Kansas City. So he's trying to perform in front of, former teammates, former friends. I'm sure family was there, all that stuff. You're dealing with, a week's worth of narrative about how you're aligned too deep, how you're too early off the ball, trying to sort through that stuff. I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but just knowing the people in the building, I can guarantee that was hammered the entire week about lining up a little bit more on the ball and not having any sort of pre-snap penalty where, Coach Reid doesn't really like those kind of things that aesthetically don't look like they belong. And so that's something I was warned a lot for in terms of being a little bit too deep off the ball. I pretty much got warned every first quarter of every game because, again, I like to skirt the lines and get as deep as possible. So I know he was working on that in practice. I'm sure he's working on timing the snap a little bit better. And then you go out and you get a penalty for each one of those things, I believe, in the first quarter, definitely the first half, but if not the first quarter. Now, mentally, you're not really sure what to do because you don't trust where you're aligned. You're kind of having to look to the side, to look to the ref to make sure, almost like a wide receiver, you're checking in and giving him a thumbs up. You probably start altering your stance a little bit. You start leaning your head forward because the rules, your helmet has to break the plane of the center's hip, which I still think is ambiguous, or his belt line, whatever that is. I don't know if that's the back of it, the front of it, the side of it. So now you don't trust your alignment. You don't trust your timing off the ball. And that bleeds into the physical side. And that's what we saw. He got back-to-back penalties on the drive. He got taken out for a couple plays to, quote unquote, cool down or just kind of get things mentally more situated. And so that mental aspect of being frustrated, being uncomfortable, not trusting where you are on the field in terms of your relationship to the defensive end, where you are in terms of your relationship to your guard, to your center, the timing of when you're getting off the ball, when you're utilizing a silent count at an away venue. All those things bleed into the physical side of things, and I think that's what we saw. Now, he is a guy who's been penalized a little bit in the past in terms of the physical side. So that is something that, when you sign him, that there's going to be a few holding calls throughout the year, and that's fine. But I think this is a very direct link to it. And so the last few weeks we've seen, the pre-snap stuff get cleaned up, and with that, the post-snap physical side of it get cleaned up as well. So I think he's in a lot better place mentally now, but I definitely kind of understood what he was going through. Never had it to that degree, but understand the uncomfortability and that feeling that you just don't really know what to do on the field when you're being told your line wrong, you're being told you're too early, and then you start getting holding calls and missed blocks. It's a very uncomfortable place, and I did not envy him for that little stretch.
Yeah. Well, because when you play, I remember you said this at Sloan a couple of years ago, because, for as good of a tackle as you were, you didn't test well at the combine. And so I remember you said, at that panel, how you had to be kind of perfect with your steps and your placement and all that kind of stuff. And yet this is the first time I'm hearing, for example, that people used to ask you about, your alignment and stuff. How did you maintain your confidence in those situations? Because, obviously you were able to work it out and make sure that you were never really an issue at all for the Chiefs. And it seems like Jawaan Taylor has somewhat broken through there. Is it just like a self-confidence in the face of these things? Is it because to me, it's something where you're exactly right. The more things you have to think about, the less you're able to allow your physical ability to shine. And it's truly how does one they sort of maintain that confidence in the face of all those things?
Yeah, I mean, in the specific instance of making sure you're aligned correctly, like I said, I would literally turn to the side and look to the ref and give him a thumbs up, and he'd give me a thumbs up or a head nod, and then I know I was okay for that play. And you do that a couple times, and you kind of establish this rapport that, okay, we got things covered, and I'm not going to call you for it later on. But I think there's also a relationship to your offensive guard as well. Everyone talks about tackle depth in terms of how deep we're getting. We're relatively aligned off the guard at all times. We wait for him to set his feet, and then we kind of set our width from there. And there's a general depth off the ball that we kind of feel based on the guard. And so, guards can be more up on the line on run plays. They like to be really far back on pulls. That's one of the reads for linebackers and for defensive linemen when it's a gap scheme or a power play. So there's a chance that, the tackle's moving and he's not necessarily feeling like he's moving as much as he is, but the guard could be moving a little bit too. Everyone compares people to Lane Johnson in terms of depth off the ball, in terms of how quickly you get off the ball. Historically, the Eagles have had guards that also like to align deep. And so you've got a guard and a tackle who are basically taking as much space off the ball as possible, and now their heads are aligned even. And so you don't get that kind of bowed appearance where maybe it looks like the tackle's slightly deeper than he is in reality. The guard and the tackle in Philly's case, or for me being as old as I am, Marshall Yonda and some of those Baltimore, Ricky Wagner on the right side and Michael Orr on the left side, the depth that they got, but the guards were at the same level. And so it's got a different appearance to it. But in those instances, you just kind of fall back on your technique. You just kind of trust, what got you there. Like you said, I kind of relied on efficiency of movement. I couldn't out athlete a guy at my position. If I could out athlete them, I feel sorry for their combine scores because it had to have been pretty rough. So you just kind of have to go back to those keys. That's my offensive line coach originally in Cleveland, George Warhop, also Jawaan Taylor's original offensive line coach. So we share that similarity as well. I had a rough stretch the beginning of my second year where I was trying to do too much, and I was trying to copy the techniques of other players. And DeMar Dotson for Tampa played really good against Cam Wake, and that was our opponent week one. So I tried to copy his stuff, and it just got me out of sorts. And he was like, "Hey, you're just going to go back to basics. You're going to take a simple pass set. You're going to use your hands. You're going to trust yourself." And that was kind of the professional awakening to gaining that confidence in myself that just trust the fundamentals, trust the basics. If you're in the right spot, if you're using halfway decent technique as an offensive lineman, you're probably going to win a majority of the time. A lot of the times we lose, it's because as good as the guys across from us are, we're doing something that gets us out of position, that gets us out of sorts, where afraid of Micah Parsons' speed, so we take a poor set and open up the outside shoulder. Like, there's a lot of things that we do as offensive linemen that lead to our own demise. And so just having that confidence to just trust yourself, be in the right spot, slow down, take it easy, just use the right technique, and things will pan out.
Mitch, real quick, one more on Jawaan Taylor, and I saw from Lane Johnson as well. I mean, he's obviously anticipating the snap count, right? He's not waiting to audibly hear it, especially those first couple of weeks, where he's really getting off the ball and he's going before the ball is snapped. Is that how you did it? Anticipated? Do you need a quarterback that's got that rhythm? I mean, what did you see when you saw Jawaan Taylor being so early before and frankly getting away with it? And he's not the only one.
Yeah, so the general snap count that most quarterbacks use is something like wide 80, set hut. And most guys go on the hut. The hut is the thing that the center snaps the ball on that everyone else moves on. And so it's just kind of changing that algorithm in your head that I'm not going to go on hut. I'm going to go on set, or I'm going to go this little bit early and just kind of get into that rhythm. So you are kind of forming your own rhythm. It's just slightly different than everyone else's rhythm. And what everyone else around you is doing. In Cleveland, Joe and I, we didn't really cheat per se the verbal count as much. I think that's a little bit rare to use it to such an advantage the way Jawaan does. I think even if you look at Lane, like, he skirts it a little bit, but it tends to be on silent count a little bit more. But we got to a point my last year in Cleveland where we had Alex Mack at center. His silent count was immaculate. We started using it at home. We actually played the AFC West that year. We played Denver at home and Oakland at home, and I had to go against Von Miller and Khalil Mack those 2 games. And so we got a better jump off silent count because Alex was so good and we could time it so well. So we would ask on third downs, can we just go silent count if we want? And our coach said, sure, which is really disorienting for defensive linemen because they're not getting ready for silent count at all. Like, they're waiting to hear the snap count. And so you got a small advantage there. And we also had the advantage of, getting a little bit of a better timing off the ball. But it works when both guys are going at once. Philly does a pretty good job of that. Jason Peters historically, and Mailata a little bit. Maybe they don't go quite as early as Lane or quite as often. But if you got 2 guys moving at the same time, it looks synced up. It looks like, quote unquote, the right thing. And so for guys, it's just, you've never trusted that you could lead that early the way, Lane and Jawaan do. You just kind of say, like, everyone wants to leave a little early. You'd prefer to, beat the defense lineman off the ball. That's like our biggest worry. And the biggest risk factor for us is being laid off the ball. It's just kind of only come to light the last few years that guys are testing the limits the way they have on the verbal cadences. And so it's just kind of changing, like I said, that little bit of timing that instead of on hut, maybe you're going on set or you're pushing the boundary. And again, sometimes it's as simple as, I remember a game, I think against Vaughn, it felt like he was jumping off sides every time, and maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But I was like, well, if they're not calling on him, why don't I just leave early? And so I left earlier than I was used to, and they didn't call it on me. And I was like, maybe I have something here. So sometimes it works both ways.
Mitch, you you referenced Andy and how hard his offense can be for young receivers, and he's not the kind of guy who's going to pare things down. And I think back to last year when Steve Spagnuolo was playing some younger defensive players, and that was a knock on him. He didn't really trust young guys until he knew what they were doing. Do you think Andy, first of all, what makes Andy's offense so hard, so complicated? And do you think he could benefit from dumbing it down a little bit to help guys like Rashee Rice and Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney get going?
Well, I do think one of the benefits of the offense is how multiple it is and how attacking it is and how much pressure he can put on the other team. And that's something, I think unless you're kind of in it or around it or you study it, you don't understand how much pressure you can put on a defense with formations. Obviously this year with Miami, the 80+% guy moving at the snap, I think we kind of understand the importance of guys moving at the ball and just changing the picture in general and hoping that the defense slips up a little bit, or in this league, a half step in one direction could be the difference between a touchdown and an interception. And so you want to change the picture as much as possible. You want to have things that are not as predictable. There's a little bit of, like, I think what people maybe consider what McVay used to do, which is you kind of line up in a formation and everything looks relatively similar, but you have 6 or 7 plays off of it. But that's not necessarily what you want to do. You don't want to have like a bunch formation and this guy's the point every single time and like everything comes off of that. You'd like to start in a different formation, shift a guy, motion a guy, and now you create the bunch, but the defense doesn't have 25 seconds to think through it and think through all the variables. And it's 2nd and 8 in a bunch formation with Kelce at the point. They're more likely to use him as a blocker, but if he's off the ball, he's more likely to, run his deep over. You change that picture, you make them have to process that information really quickly at the line because guys are on the move, because guys are in different spots. And so I think that complexity aids in why the offense is so good. And so if you pare that down a little bit, you're potentially taking away one of the main advantages, which is how multiple you are, how much pressure you can put on the defense. And I'm sure he does. I mean, he's not going to go out there and just put guys out that don't know what they're doing. And he's not going to have the playbook be too big that, the receiving core doesn't trust it and Pat doesn't trust them and the timing's off. He's going to go through a week of practice. Maybe he has this ideal version of what a full playbook could look like, but he sees things in practice and guys aren't able to handle it. But I do think, for the most part, he also is good about putting guys in certain roles. Certain receivers can be an X receiver, and he's kind of got a slotted thing in the offense. There's usually a gadget guy or two where they've got the jet sweeps and they've got the kind of fun plays. There's, maybe a guy who's a deeper cross guy who tries to clear things out. There's, a Sammy Watkins, a big body who is the point on the bunch formations, and that's kind of his role. Everyone wants, Ross to be in there now. And it seems like he's got a very specific, package of plays that they're comfortable with him and that he's comfortable with. So he does slot guys into roles. He does try to make things as easy as possible. I will say the receivers maybe isn't the strongest suit in terms of playing well early, but I think the staff as a whole does an exceptional job at not letting young guys get discouraged by, lack of performance early on in a career. That's something I kind of noticed with Fisher just from afar, how good they are about just keeping things positive and getting the most out of guys, where a guy in Fisher's shoes with the media perception of him, and I honestly can't remember what the play actually looked like the first couple of years when I wasn't there, but it's so easy for that guy to become a bust. But the organization didn't let that happen. D Ford, yeah, he doesn't produce like Nick Bosa right away, but those last 2 years he produced exceptionally well. And so there's all these stories of the coaching staff like taking the long view on guys and getting the most out of them over the duration of that rookie contract. And I think that is something that, with the immediacy of how we like things now, we don't see that quite as much with the receiver position. And of course we'd love to see it, but I think the staff is borne out that they know how to develop guys really well.
Well, I think that was something that somebody on the team pointed out to me last year, which was not only the draft was really good last year, right? The most games played by any draft class in the NFL last year, but there was also Joshua Williams really struggled against Buffalo on contested stuff. And, Jalen Watson had his moments where he struggled. Brian Cook, even within the AFC Championship game himself, didn't have the best game and then made a big play. And then they stuck with those guys to when, you lose L'Jarius Sneed, a few plays into that game and you're playing 3 rookies. But to your point, you make a great point. early in Eric Fisher's career, there were questions. I remember early in 2015 whether he was accused of ducking J.J. Watt, and all to the point. Then he's and at Pro Bowls are kind of they're not the best way, but he's a Pro Bowl left tackle by the time it's all said and done. And I think that's a really good point. And I know Petro's brought this up on the show, but the wide receivers were producing about as much through 5 or 6 games last year as they are this year. The big difference is that Travis, has not been as productive because he's been hurt. Do you think that, and I've said this a lot, the quick game in Kansas City has not been wide receiver driven for a few years now. The rhythm stuff, it's mostly been to Travis. Is that maybe a way to get the confidence up for the receivers because I think that's the other part where Patrick, moves out of the pocket, plays out of structure, but you need experience with a quarterback to kind of have, to sort of think the same way. And I just, that's the one place where I think 3-step drop, kind of get the ball out of his hands to some of these receivers and get their confidence up so that they can, eventually, play to the point where they're playing, playoff level football at the end of the season. Is that something where there's some meat on the bone in the offense, Mitch?
Potentially. And if you contrast it to the game last night where you see the Cowboys and the Chargers, kind of old school, West Coast offense with Mike McCarthy, 200 Dragon Lion, and they're just slants and quick outs all across the board. And you see that a lot with, the Chargers as well, throwing a bunch of those outs to Keenan and kind of the quicker stuff. I would say that stuff it's it's going to plays that we don't use as much anymore, but they are used like in the RPOs, or they're baked into other things where you have those, kind of route concepts, and they're built into run plays now, instead of just having to call, a 200 jet with a slant concept on one side and a slant flat on the other. And I don't know, this is just me projecting, but I would imagine that, coach thinks that, all right, we've got a certain group of plays that's maybe quicker passes, kind of the old school, like 3-step drop from under center. Those, like you said, don't really get called as much anymore. There's the empty plays that are kind of quicker rhythm plays, which for offensive linemen, we don't really ever, conceptualize that empty plays are most similar to quick plays. We have to like hear the tag that it's specifically a, quote unquote quick play, and we can be aggressive with the guy. Otherwise, an empty play just feels like an empty play, and oh man, he's going to hold it back there. But the empty plays for the most part are supposed to be in rhythm, whether it's, that 3-step drop from gun, the ball's supposed to be coming out. So those are not, true 3-step drop from under center quick plays, but, rhythm throws that you should be able to get the ball out quickly. But I would imagine the confidence coach has in Pat is just, I can call this deeper stuff, and I'm just going to trust that if reads 1 and 2 are taken away, he's going to get to 3 and 4 quick enough that turns into the quasi, cheap 2 or 3 yard throw, and it, can be a dump off to a running back, or Kelce just stopping in the middle of the play because he feels space, and that becomes, a version of quick game, but you still have that attacking mentality where you're throwing a lot of the defense and the route concepts are going longer. So it is probably something that they could do a little bit more of, just a true, kind of old school West Coast 3-step from under center, quick passing plays. But I think he's just able to blend that with so much else of the offense that he probably figures that stuff isn't necessarily worth doing, because in his mind, it's probably a lower percentage play. And I can bake that into these other things, combine it with the run play, which I don't used to do before, or trust that we do have the speed of receiver and the way defenses are afraid of Mahomes' throwing ability. Like, their coverage is going to dictate that the underneath stuff's going to come open. So could be something that they can lean into, but it seems like, he's got a pretty good version of what he wants to do at this point.
Mitch, why is it that for about the last year and a half, 3rd and 1, it seems to be such a riddle for this team? Do you see something that's why they're out of sync, why that seems to be so difficult?
Actually, yes. I'm glad you said a year and a half, because I think the issue is specifically a year and a half old. In 21, the team was awesome because they ran every version of, relatively quick dive play right behind Trey Smith. And Trey was a rookie, and combined with Creed next to him, Wiley on the other side, they could just kind of maul the pile, and Trey would destroy whoever was in front of him and create enough room. And I think Sherm was on the team too, and potentially he's maybe a better short yardage back than we realized. Last year in week 1, I think Trey hurt his ankle pretty good, potentially hurt both ankles actually. Played in week 2, which was the Thursday game against the Chargers. Probably shouldn't have played based on, how it looked explosive wise. And I think those things lingered the rest of the year. And so I think you're running 3rd down plays, and Trey's usually the focal point. It's technically a zone play to the left, but based on where the running back is, he kind of hits it right behind, right guard, right tackle. And now Trey doesn't have the ability to dig deep and to root the guy out of the hole the way he used to. And I think that kind of led to, oh man, we can't rely on what we used to rely on. Now we got to kind of scheme things up a little bit differently. And that's kind of gone into the rabbit hole of, all the scheme stuff that we love when it works. We hate when it doesn't work. As I tried to point out the other night, like, we've run that option play with Tony a million times. It's usually Travis as the point guy. He makes a better decision, and we usually pick up the first down, or we usually score in the red zone. But that play is typically successful. It's not something that's like a crazy Andy Reid play. It's just a play he's run for the last 6 or 7 years. It's been successful. But like, I think earlier in the season, we tried a dive style play. It didn't work. So I think they're just searching for kind of the bread and butter. We obviously know the QB sneak's not going to happen, but just finding like that bread and butter run play, because when I first got here, we were really good in short yardage, and it was more with spread stuff and shotgun runs. One, kind of realizing like, teams like to run a saw blitz, we don't call it the Sam, but Sam and Will blitz. And so you're kind of bringing 6 guys across the line, and it plays like a 0 pressure. And essentially the running back has to defeat the middle linebacker one-on-one. Like, that's the man coverage guy. But because they're bringing an extra guy off of one side on a weak side run, you kind of have to push to that guy. And again, it becomes, if it's technically a zone to the left, the right guard, right tackle, or one-on-one with a defensive tackle, a defensive end is trying to cross your face as a tackle, and you just have to beat your guy, and you have to create enough space that the running back can either make that linebacker miss or get him off balance enough that he can fall forward for the first down. And we were pretty good at those runs. And there was also the element that at the time we were running a little bit more read stuff, and Pat would pull the ball and he would run for the first down. The team doesn't really do that anymore. So if you're running shotgun runs, it's kind of the same as running, under center, because the quarterback isn't necessarily a threat the way he used to be. So you don't have that capability in terms of the shotgun runs anymore, which, again, everyone complains about shotgun runs. They are percentage-wise more efficient on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 and goal to go at the 1 yard line than under center runs. And we don't really have the ability to run the dive plays we used to in the past. So I don't think there's a bread and butter. And I think that's the issue, is not really having all right, we're just going to lean on this. And we know that this kind of grouping of plays is going to be successful against all the fronts, and we're just going to destroy him and make it work.
Well, and Alex Smith also, when he was the quarterback before Pat, was a very effective runner when he kept the ball as well. Very good downhill, very athletic. I remember when you guys were in Buffalo, prior to you being there, I think they won the game on a short yardage play where Alex pulled the ball, and it's just not who Pat is, even though Pat is plenty athletic himself. But it is weird, and you do see, and this is maybe the last question, because I know we gotta let you go, but when you're a lineman and you're playing through injury, it's one of those groupings where I feel like linemen, more than any other position group, don't want to leave the game, because cohesion matters a ton, right? If you're Trey Smith, for example, how does playing hurt? Do you develop bad habits? How could that sort of impact his future with the Chiefs? Because I've sort of looked at that the same way you have, where it's just something's been missing, and I don't necessarily think it's his fault.
Yeah, I mean, in the moment, you just kind of feel that obligation to be on the field, to be with your teammates, to be, protecting your quarterback. And if, the team thinks that you being out there isn't as effective as, the backup being in there, it's kind of on them to say, hey, something isn't right, and, we're going to sit you against your well wishes. That's assuming, obviously, you have clearance to be in the game and the doctors cleared you and all that. I would imagine whatever he was going through last year didn't linger into this year. I think, physically he looks pretty similar. I'd say a little bit of struggles in pass protection, but I think those were there the first year as well. And I think his technique is just slightly disjointed, to where he doesn't play as strong in pass protection as he does in the run game, and not as strong as you would expect for a guy who does all the dominant physical things that he does. I think that's just more kind of punch timing and certain, technique things that really just you work every single day, but it's hard to, commit to something like that. And if you are injured and you're playing through something, it absolutely can affect you. It can lead to, bad negative habits. If you've got a shoulder that doesn't feel so good, maybe you don't want to punch with that as much, and you get into, using the opposite hand, and maybe that's, as I say, as the right tackle, you probably want to be more outside hand dominant, but you're afraid to use it because it really hurts every time you do, and you start punching with your inside hand. You now are having to change your technique a little bit to get into the right spot to where that's effective. Or a typical fault of guys who are inside hand dominant punchers is they tend to open up a little bit to do it, because this is an offensive line pet peeve. I feel like most coaches have you do punching drills, you're always punching in front of you, but in a game, I'm never punching in front of me. The guy's always offset to one side typically. And so that's something that, throwing the inside hand, you're usually kind of throwing it across your body, and that's going to open up your hips or your shoulders in some regard. So that's an instance where, say, a upper body extremity on one side can bleed into, poor punching technique. Or, again, if you've got a lower body injury and you start to, kind of do things a little bit differently, or you alter your stance, or you're hesitant to do something because you feel like that extra little thing might, make your hamstring worse, or you can't load up the ankle the way that you're used to. You would like to think that wouldn't linger past a specific year, that whatever kind of technique that you adopt that season can kind of get unlearned in the next off season. So I think that he's relatively healthy. I think technique wise, it's kind of the same stuff that I saw the first couple of years. It's just in pass pro every now and again. the punch timing is a little bit weird. The targeting of the right hand's a little bit off, and that can lead to a couple of the outcomes that we don't necessarily expect out of him.
Mitchell, we really appreciate the time, man. It's I always enjoyed listening to you at the podium, how thoughtful you were about everything and how thorough you were about everything. So it's great to hear that you're doing well, and hopefully you won't be a stranger. Hopefully we can get you back on again here in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, and I would love to come back on.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
We'll do it.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Mitch.
Mitchell Schwartz, four-time All-Pro right tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs. Absolutely fantastic at his position, and always one of the guys that was a lot of fun to listen to. And I don't know, kind of thorough, like in the breakdown. I love the part. I love the the school within the school, right? Like I remember Peyton Manning talking about being off platform and throwing the ball. Like everybody talks about footwork, but you're usually not able to set up properly. Hearing him talk about that punch, right? Every offensive line drill is that. Even, Little League, it's like right in front of you. And how often you get to do that, you don't even think about that. And that's something that, comes across his mind. You understand why he was such a tactician at everything that he did.
Well, it was funny because like they did when we all presented at Sloan that one year, and like him just talking about how, like, I just think about like how honest he was about his own athleticism and how he had to compensate for that and how he had to be such a tactician and all this stuff. And I'm just thinking like the craft that somebody has to go through to be an offensive lineman of that caliber. I'm really happy for our listeners that got to hear him talk about that and all the stuff that goes into it. And I think, obviously I have a lot more empathy for Jawaan Taylor now that after thinking about how of all the things that are probably going through his head.
Yeah, no doubt. We're proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, serving the greater Kansas City metro area. Since 1994, parking lot problems are no longer a problem if you call Gann Asphalt and Concrete. 816-484-3338. You can find them online at GannAsphalt.com. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. Again, find them online at GannAsphalt.com. Jeff, what was your biggest takeaway from what Mitch had to say?
I like the offensive breakdown, the understanding what Andy does and what he needs to do. I think Eric's right. When you talk to offensive linemen historically, in my job, they tend to be the best and the brightest because they, one, are humble, and two, they have to see so much and have to be in sync with the quarterback. Receivers are more colorful and candid, and running backs are the same way, but the guys in the middle of it all just have a better sense of things, and they're more philosophical by nature. He was a very thoughtful interview. I think if we put Tyreek Hill on here, it'd be a lot funnier, but maybe not as instructive.
Right. Yeah, he's a lot of fun. I always enjoyed, and I always thought, and I asked his brother this at the Super Bowl one year. Tell me you don't hear a little bit of Napoleon Dynamite's brother when he talks. Like,
oh yeah, his brother's got much more of that, like that. Drawls the wrong word, but it's yeah. I mean, and also very, very intelligent lineman in his own way. In fact, it was funny when in the Miami Super Bowl where he was like sort of he actually Jeff at Radio Row like basically predicted Wasp, because he was like, Andy's gonna, that 2019 team really struggled with cover 3. You remember against the Chargers a couple times, and they really had a hard time moving the ball. And so he was like, Andy's going to try to drag the receivers across the field and get it into man and then whip across. And it was like, it's exactly what happened on Wasp. So it's funny, and it's really cool also. And it's one thing I did learn, and maybe Jeff can expound on this, also being a player himself as well, but like playing wide receiver in high school and the first couple of years of college, like that's all I knew. I only knew the route tree. I knew like the blocking. I knew who to block on run plays, but I didn't know what anybody's doing. When I played tight end, like I had to know, if I was playing right tight end, I didn't know the left tackle's responsibility. It magnifies it, right? So him being able to talk about the routes and him being able to talk about all that, it truly is because like the closer you get to the football, the more symbiotic you have to understand the game. And, obviously he's very intelligent, but I think all linemen sort of have to know, like, call it sort of all the intricacies of the offense, which is cool.
Yeah.
Well, you also have more impact on what happens in the game, right? More danger comes the closer you are to football. You screw it up, bad things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hit on a couple more things here. One, we saw not the most dynamic offensive performance, Jeff, in this game, but we did see Travis Kelce not just racking up catches. 10 for 67 and a touchdown is what he had 2 weeks ago. This past week, though, 9 for 124. More down the field plays, 40 yards down the field. Are you convinced that Travis Kelce's back to the old Travis Kelce?
I think he's getting there. I think it'll be up and down. To be honest with you, I don't know how healthy he is still. I felt like the way Denver defended him was a little bit confounding. I'm always amazed at how much he gets lost in zone defenses when he's the number one target. And I was at the game, and so the angle I had was from that end zone closer to the drum deck. So I saw a lot of play. It was a great vantage point to see plays develop. And there were a couple of situations there where he just, ran a route in the middle of his own. Patrick scrambled. He just stood there, and the ball came to him. And so that's going to be the way that he will put up big numbers. But I imagine this week they'll put Derwin James on him. He'll get a lot more hands on him. Will be more physical. So I think it'd be great to think he's going to do that every week. But I just don't think teams are going to sit there and say Travis Kelce is going to get his and we'll live with that. I think you'll see more teams try to take him away week in and week out. So, he'll have to work harder to have that kind of production.
You agree with that, Eric? Do you think this is a wide receiver game?
Yeah, I mean, Derwin James is very talented. The Chargers, play that too high, and underneath stuff. It's not going to be a wide receiver game like the way that the Bengals, playoff game was. Like they're still going to play zone underneath, and I think it's going to be a Rashee Rice type of game where Sam was talking about on your show how much he excels against zone. Like that's going to have to be the game that he plays, which again is going to piss off the people that want to see MVS and Sky get more targets. I just don't think that's actually going to happen. I think it's going to be more.
Who are those people?
Well, like everybody's begging for MVS to be more productive, and it's just not like and I'm the biggest MVS guy in the world. And I just don't see it happening anymore. Like it's a weird thing. Like it's going to be a Rashee Rice show, I think, on Sunday at 4:00.
Yeah, and I think that's where it needs to go. They get Charles Omenihu back. What kind of impact do you expect, Jeff?
I'm curious to see. Like I didn't watch him that closely in San Francisco. I know he played on a great defensive line with Nick Bosa, but watching him in preseason, I was pretty impressed by what he showed in terms of his athletic ability and his quickness. So yeah, it's this defense was already playing at a pretty high level. You put him into the mix with Chris Jones and Karlaftis has come on, and you've seen some promise from Mike Dana and FAU. It's one more chess piece for Steve Spagnuolo. I mentioned on the radio show the Border Patrol with the morning guys earlier this morning about sometimes you worry that the hype that followed Jaron Reed a couple years ago into this team when it was a second coming of Warren Sapp and he ended up doing nothing. But I think that's not going to happen. I think he will play at a high level. I'm encouraged because they haven't been trying to sell him. They've been letting him perform and do his thing. So I think he should play well.
11.5 sacks in 4 years, Eric. More pressures than sacks, and now he's got a great running mate in Chris Jones. You can see an impact, or Jeff, you can kind of put Frank Clark in that mix too. He didn't live up to certainly the price they paid for him. We've seen guys come from other teams and not have a big impact. What are we going to see early and throughout the course of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think where he's going to complement. So looking at the snap counts that Jones has played, when you look at pass rush, 29 snaps in week 2, he played 12 of them on the edge. He only had 10 in week 3 because that was the Bears game, but he still had 4 from the edge all the way until last week, right? 26 pass rushing snaps. He played 6 of them from the edge. Like where Charles Omenihu adds value is being a sturdy, much like Frank Clark was. And I think this is, I was not a Frank Clark fan. The people who want Frank Clark back on this team, I think, are insane. But what Frank Clark did for this team was on first and second down, he set an edge in the run game that was reminiscent of Justin Houston and not reminiscent of Dee Ford, right? And to have a guy that can set an edge on early downs and then go inside, right? Because Chris Jones being able to beat up tackles with the bull rush on late downs, Charles Omenihu can then play over the guards and really win. And so having that versatility, I think, makes the Chiefs pass rush really multidimensional and possibly like pretty scary.
Frank Clark's name is mentioned a lot, Jeff. Would you use the term insanity to describe those that use his name?
I'm with Eric. I don't see the fit anymore. And you have players who already are showing promise, who you want to see grow. So Karlaftis in that category, Nduke Uzama, Mike Dana has really played well, I think, this year. I mean, for a guy who didn't do a whole lot in his first couple years. And someone mentioned, will Frank Clark go to the practice squad? I'm like, I don't think guys like Frank Clark go to the practice squad. Like, they can retire. It's like there's no way he's going to sit around and just be around to be a guy. Like, he's going to look for an opportunity, a job. And look, I think when he played well, he was good for this team and he helped this team win a couple championships. But I'd rather, if you're going to make a move, I'd rather you find another receiver or somebody to help you in another department. I don't see where there's much. The juice is not worth the squeeze, to use that cliche.
Yeah.
Well, and for what? You've spent a first-round pick the last 2 years on a defensive end.
Exactly.
And this team is already having trouble getting Felix on the field. Like, how many snaps did Felix play the other day? 6?
5.
Yeah, I mean, so, and that's okay, right? But where is he going to take snaps from? I mean, I actually think the practice squad is fine if he wants to win another ring. And obviously it's super cheap for the Chiefs. And if he just wants to go there and hang out, perfect. But like to take, to take a jersey off of Michael Dana or Felix Anazuke Uzama, Garlaftis has been amazing. Like, great development this year. Like, you've put too much into developing the young players on this team to sort of go back on it now.
Yeah. Let's also point out that, Frank Clark's got to be willing to play for basically the league minimum.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know that that's going to happen, and certainly not a practice squad salary. Second in points allowed, 6th in yards allowed right now, 12th in sacks. That's the Chiefs defense right now, Jeff. Where do they rank in the league? They're getting ready to go through a test of Justin Herbert. Yeah. As long as he doesn't have to, lead something late where he'll throw a pick. But then after Russell Wilson, who was playing great until he ran into the Chiefs last time, then Tua, then Jalen Hurts, who again isn't playing as well as he did last year. I don't know. Maybe they're not going to get the big Jordan Love, hasn't kept things going. Josh Allen that Bills offense has been hot and cold. Joe Burrow's had one really good outing. I mean, in a lot of ways, maybe it looks like the quarterbacks and the offenses are playing down. And statistically speaking, maybe it's not the gauntlet that we thought it was going to be here.
Well, I think that's true of everybody. I think scoring is down across the league, and it's becoming a very defensive-heavy league, which is what happens when you lose a lot of big-time veteran quarterbacks. We've seen a lot of Hall of Famers retire, and Aaron Rodgers is not playing for the Jets right now. So you have a lot of young guys, a lot of young offenses, and you're going to see a lot of up and down play. But I certainly feel like, and again, I think people sometimes hear you say the Chiefs are good, they're not elite, they think it's some kind of a dig. It's like they played some bad quarterbacks. They played some bad offenses. They put up numbers, but when they play the Justin Herberts, the Josh Allens, and the Joe Burrows and those people, you're going to get a better feel for who they are. When I watch the Browns play, I know they're elite because they've got Myles Garrett and they've got shut down corners and they play fast. When I watch the Niners play, I know they're elite because they've got Nick Bosa, they got Fred Warner, they got a ton of guys who can get after the quarterback. The Jets the same way. The Chiefs are a top 5 defense right now. Now, can they be a defense that can carry you to a championship? We're going to find that out when they start playing these more accomplished offenses.
Necessity is the mother of invention, Eric. It's necessitated that they play better defense to win these games. They kept giving the ball back to Minnesota, where Minnesota had a chance to get back into it. The defense had to play. How good do you think it is? And is some of this that maybe it was better in the past, but they were protecting 17-point leads, 21-point leads. Now we're getting their best shot.
I think it was generally bad in like 2021, right? When we were first starting the show and they were giving up deep touchdowns to Ricky Seals-Jones and guys like that for Washington. I think that it improved a lot. But look, I say this every single week when people ask me, what do you expect? They've used a second-round pick on their 2 starting linebackers for 2 consecutive years. They've used first-round picks on their 2 defensive ends. Chris Jones is one of the highest-paid defensive linemen in the entire league, and they used a top 25 pick on a corner, and then like 10 other picks on corners. They used a free agent contract on Justin Reed, and day 2 pick on Brian Cook. Like, this should be a good defense, right? And Spags is a Super Bowl winning multiple times over defensive coordinator. So I think we're getting, and here's the other part. The wide receiver group sucks, right? They're not using any of that money on the wide receivers. So, or draft capital, really. So what do we expect? Like, this defense is good because they put a lot into it, and they're getting a lot out.
I'll push back a little bit on the wideouts. I mean, you're right. They're not spending a lot.
2 second-round picks in MBS, I know, but
and a third
well,
and change.
Kadarius Toney.
I mean, so they're
you're right, but they have put a lot in. I mean, they traded away one of the best receivers in the league, if not the best, and basically used that mostly to replenish the defense, right? Like, that's exactly what they've done, and to their credit, they're bearing fruit on that gamble.
Jeff, the matchup with the Chargers. By the way, we're brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete. You can get an estimate right now, free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com, solving parking lot problems since 1994. Don't let your parking lot be a problem. Go to GannAsphalt.com. What do you think of the matchup with the Chargers, Jeff? Is it a good one now, or they've been close ever since Justin Herbert's got there? Are you looking for that again this week?
Close again. I mean, they match up very well with the Chiefs. Now, when it comes to winning the game, that's a problem. But you look at who they have across the board, from quarterback to receivers to line play, offensive line to the defense. Even though the defense is not playing great, when they play the Chiefs, they play them tough. And so, yeah, I certainly think it's going to be that kind of game. Also because they're desperate to get a win. That loss to Dallas was a tough one. I know people are saying they're 2-3 right now and they don't look good, but they've lost to Dallas and they've lost to Miami. Those are the 2 big losses they got. And if you say that's the Bears and that's the Broncos, they're probably sitting here at 4-1. So I would not look at them at 2-3 and say this is a dog team going in the wrong direction. Like, they're going to come in here and they're going to play hard because their backs are against the wall.
Yeah, if there's one thing we know about the Chargers, it's they win games they need to win. So that's a.
So what are you saying in this one?
I mean, yeah, I agree with everything Jeff said, but I like, and I'm gonna back like last night's game, and I know you're a big McCarthy fan, Petro, and I'm mostly there with you. I've worked with Mike before. That was the worst coach game I've seen in an awful long time. Like I
like that field goal before halftime.
I do not believe that I do not.
Have you not watched the Giants play yet this year?
I've seen that. Yeah, I mean, Brian Dable.
How could you not? They're on national TV every week.
But like my thing is if it was Andy Reid and you said the Chiefs really need this game, I would say, okay, I'm going to add a little bit to the Chiefs, bet, right? Brandon Staley really needing this game offers me no signal. Like, he is, I mean, I just, and Justin Herbert, like, Justin Herbert's a very talented quarterback. No Mike Williams, who normally kills the Chiefs. That's going to hurt them. They draft this guy named someone named Quentin Johnston in the draft. And I didn't see him last night play in the top part. Khalil Mack can really only get sacks against the Raiders. Like this, I actually, this is the least afraid I've been of the Chargers in the last 3 years.
That seems a little scary. Like, the extra time to prepare. Everybody's in New York and traveling and everything. Like, it's a bye week.
And live cameos.
Yeah. I mean,
have they lost since he started, dating Taylor Swift though?
No.
I mean, she seems to be like a good luck charm. She's clearing Travis's head every once in a while, right? Like that's a pretty,
Yeah, they played the Bears, the Vikings, and the Broncos.
That's fair.
She showed up. She's a good luck charm, all right.
That is a fair point. I mean, the better games still.
She picked the right ones. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Jeff. What's your prediction on the game?
I got Chiefs 21-20. I think the scoring stays down. But I think I think the big advantage here, as you said, is 10 days prepare versus 6.
Okay, Eric.
I think the big advantage is Andy Reid versus Brandon Staley. Rest differential, better quarterback, better offensive line, better defense. Chiefs are favored by 5.5. I'll say they win by margin. I'll go 30-13.
Ooh, wow. Okay. How about that?
Is that Soren Petro in that bottom box now?
I mean, I tweeted it yesterday because Curtis, God bless him, was like, is this team going to come to Arrowhead and be competitive? And I go, Herbert's going to go 37-43 for 485, 4 touchdowns, and San Diego loses by 3. Like that might happen too, right? He might put up, he does have his best games against the Chiefs in losses. But I just, that team is drawing dead. I mean, do you see my man's beard? Like Brandon Staley became beard guy to try to overcome this. And it like nothing works for him. Nothing works for him.
I do.
They've lost 2 games by what? 5 points total?
They lost to the Tennessee Titans. Did you watch the Titans play in London? Like, we don't send our best and brightest teams to London. We saw that team got beat by the Titans. They stink.
Yeah.
That stuff happens too. The Niners got beat by the Browns with a backup quarterback. It happens.
That team at least has a good defense.
I think, listen, they are 2-3. That's real. They have lost to the Dolphins and Cowboys. That's real. They've also lost to the Titans. That's real. They can't separate. I mean, are you aware of the scores? They lose to the Dolphins 36-34, right? They lose to the Titans 27-24.
Yep.
They beat the Vikings 28-24. They beat the Raiders 24-17, and they lose to the Cowboys 20-17. Only one game has been more than 4 points.
Well, in both their wins, they went for a 4th and 1 in their own end, missed it, and still won. They could be 0-5. Like, this is
yeah.
That's what bad defense does for you.
But by those scores, they could be 5-0 too.
Yeah.
But we know that San Diego's not winning those games. You could say all you want, that all these one-score games, no. They're either going 50-50 or they're going 0 for the Chargers. They're not going to catch lightning in a bottle and win these close games.
I love how Eric wants to be the wacky zany guy, but then also the guy that you got to trust his math and his analytics.
That's right. All the stats go out the window when it comes to
who do you want to be? I'll take Chiefs 27-20. I think 2020 and the Chiefs punch one in late. I think it's tight, but they get the cover. They've been better at doing that here of late. I do think an implosion could happen here if it starts to get away from them. I don't know where the Chargers dig down deep. I'm very worried. They play every game to 1 score. I think Jeff's probably got the best prediction, but I'll take the better team. I think everything Eric said is right too. I think the Chiefs are better in this one. I'll take the Chiefs 27-20. Listen, the one thing you can take to the bank is the fact that GAN Asphalt and Concrete can keep you working. Don't worry about problems in your parking lot. And don't send a bad message to prospective clients and customers. Make sure your parking lot is as smooth and easy to operate in as possible. It can save you a lot of money, a lot of liability problems with accidents in your parking lot. Don't let that happen. Contact GAN Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's best. Find them online at ganasphalt.com. So for Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager from Sumer Sports, my name is Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast.